The Biblical Times Podcast, written and edited by Dr. Leora Ravid, presented by David Green. Episode 8, The Story of Jacob and His Two Wives, Leah and Rachel. The first out of 2 episodes. Hello to all the listeners of the Biblical Times Podcast. The next 2 episodes will be dedicated to the story of Jacob and his 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. The story of Jacob and his wives is one of the most well-known tales in the Bible, and it contains all the ingredients of a sticky soap opera. It contains love, conspiracy, deceit, turmoil, envy, upheaval, and heartbreak. And it also contains whatever we may have forgotten to mention. However, this story possesses something that no other soap opera has, the reality that existed thousands of years ago, which makes it distinct from any contemporary drama we know. First, we will briefly recount the story as presented in the book of Genesis, chapters 27 to 31. Then, we will travel back some 3,500 years and explain it considering the social and legal realities that prevailed in that ancient era. 2 generations before Jacob's time, Abraham and his family left Ur, known to everyone as Ur of the Chaldeans. We discussed their journey in the first 3 episodes of our podcast. On their way to the land of Israel, the family stopped at Haran, located in what is now Turkey, where Terah, Abraham's father, passed away. One detail we overlooked in the previous episodes was that Abraham had a brother named Nahor, who also embarked on this journey. After Terah's death, Nahor remained to live in Haran, while Abraham and Sarah continued their way to the land of Israel, which at that time was called the land of Canaan. Nahor established a thriving sheep farm and a large family in Haran, in which 3 important women were born, Rebekah, Leah, and Rachel. And because we enjoy translating essential words that have lost their meaning in the English translation of the Bible, let us indulge in a linguistic treat. For the information of the women whose name is Rebekah. Rebekah in Hebrew, the original language of the Bible, means a fat heifer. In the ancient world, the rate of mortality from starvation was enormous. So a fat girl was considered beautiful and healthy who did not suffer from hunger. So Rebekah's name reveals that she was a fat, beautiful, and healthy young woman. For the listeners called Rachel, Rachel is a sheep. Leah's name was taken from an ancient language called Akkadian, which was spoken in Babylon and Haran. Leah in Akkadian means a cow. Since the 3 women were born on a thriving sheep farm, they were named after milk-producing animals. What could be more natural and logical than that? Now, after this brief commentary, we can return to the story of Jacob and his 2 wives. Abraham and Sarah's odyssey ended, and Isaac, their son, was born. When Isaac reached marriageable age, Abraham sent his servant to his brother's house in Haran to bring a bride for his son. Rebekah was brought to the land of Canaan and married Isaac, and they had twins, Esau and Jacob, who were grandchildren of Sarah and Abraham. Time marched on, and Isaac and Rebekah grew old, and the twins grew up. When Isaac felt that his last day was approaching, he realized that now was time to bless Esau, who was the eldest twin. The blessing was a kind of ceremony in which the father announced that after his death, his eldest son would inherit his assets and would be the head of the family. The tradition that placed Esau before Jacob was to Rebekah's dismay, since she preferred the younger twin. So she decided to take advantage of her elderly husband's blindness to disinherit her eldest son and pass the blessing to her preferred son. One day, she turned to Jacob and lured him to disguise himself as Esau and face his father as if he were his brother. The plot succeeded, and Isaac fell into the trap set for him. He blessed Jacob, and thus the special privilege reserved for the eldest son was transferred to the younger one. And since the blessing was given in God's name, Isaac could not withdraw from it. As expected, not an hour passed, and Esau stood before his father to receive the blessing that had just eluded him. When he heard about the fraud that was done to him, he vowed to execute his brother. Jacob, who was much weaker than his brother, had no choice but to flee for his life to Haran and seek refuge in the house of Laban, who was Nahor's son and Rebekah's sibling. What we have just said explains the reason why Jacob, who was born in the land of Israel, fled to his uncle's house in Haran, and everything we have said is told in the book of Genesis, chapter 27. Chapter 29 recounts the day when Jacob arrived in Haran and encountered Laban's two daughters, Leah and Rachel. According to the Bible, Leah, the elder daughter, had weak eyes. The precise nature of her eye flaw is unknown, but as we shall see, this flaw plays a crucial role in the narrative. In contrast, Rachel, the younger daughter, was a beautiful young woman. As everyone knows, Jacob fell in love with Rachel and desired to marry her. However, a formidable obstacle stood in his path. The obstacle was that Rachel merited being wed as a senior wife. This means that her father was entitled to marry her in return for a substantial bride price, and this must be explained. As discussed in episode 7, the bride price was a payment made by the groom's family to the father of the bride. Likely, the most common form was a bride's exchange between two families of equal status, wherein each father provided a daughter and, in turn, received a bride for one of his sons. This bridal exchange ensured that each bride would marry with the status of a senior wife. And here's the place to mention that until relatively recently, such bridal exchanges were a familiar practice among European royal houses and persist in traditional societies. In cases where such exchanges were impossible, as with Abraham who had no daughters, and now, as with Jacob, the bride price served as compensation to the father who gave his daughter to the marriage. The need for compensation is understandable because on her wedding day, the daughter left her father's home to reside in her husband's abode. The children she bore belonged to her husband's family and were the next generation of the lineage to which he belonged. When a bridal exchange was not feasible, the family who gave her daughter lost the children that would have been born had such an exchange taken place. Therefore, the bride price aimed to compensate the father for not receiving a bride for one of his sons. Let us consider two illustrative examples. The first is that of Abraham, who sent lavish gifts serving as the bride price in exchange for Rebekah. Genesis 24. An unusual instance of a bride price was Saul's demand from David. Saul, the first king of Israel, demanded that the bride price for his daughter Michal would be 100 foreskins of the Philistines, his bitter enemies. David brought him 200 foreskins and wed Michal. As we all know, great love demands great sacrifice, and Jacob, who arrived in Haran impoverished and with perforated pockets, was willing to pay any price if the beautiful Rachel would become his wife. Thus, he and Laban agreed that Rachel's bride price would be Jacob's wages for the next 7 years of labor on Laban's sheep farm. A brief quote. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I will work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Genesis 29:18-20. When the 7 years had elapsed, Jacob approached Laban and demanded that he fulfill his part of the agreement. But Laban, like his sister Rebekah, had priorities of his own. When the long-awaited wedding night arrived, Laban hosted a festive banquet to which he invited all the people of his city. During the feast, Jacob drank a glass of wine, followed by another, and perhaps even one or two more. And while his mind became clouded, Laban switched his daughters, placing Leah in Rachel's bridal bed. In the morning, when the joyful groom became disillusioned and turned to kiss his beloved wife, he discovered to his dismay that the woman lying in his bed was one to whom he had never intended to be wed. As expected, Jacob rushed to confront his father-in-law, protesting the wicked deception he had perpetrated. Laban, prepared for the meeting, replied with equanimity that if Jacob insisted on marrying Rachel, then he must return to the starting point and count another 7 years of labor. A brief abridged quote, "But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, 'What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?' Laban replied, 'It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work.' And Jacob did so. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Jacob despised Leah because her father had deceitfully married her to him after watering him with a lot of wine. He resented her because Laban stole the bride price he had paid for Rachel and then demanded him to work another 7 years, thus doubling the price he had to pay to marry the girl he loved. When God witnessed Jacob's ill treatment towards Leah, he opened her womb while preventing Rachel from conceiving. Quote, "When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren." There is no doubt that a woman whose husband hates her is a miserable woman. So it has always been, and so it is today. But whereas nowadays the wife is entitled to divorce her husband, in the ancient world this option did not exist. Legally, she was owned by her husband and therefore she could not part with him. On the other hand, if the husband wanted to divorce his wife, he was entitled to do so. Deuteronomy 24:1. Despite being scorned, Leah fulfilled her duty by bearing Jacob 6 sons and 1 daughter, solidifying her position in his household. Conversely, the beloved Rachel plunged into an abyss of despair and misery, a bottomless pit of grief. 4,000 years later, this remains unchanged. And those who doubt this assertion should listen to the desperate cries of women undergoing grueling fertility treatments, willing to pay any price to conceive their own child. One day, Rachel broke down, uttering her anguished cry, quote, "When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister, and said to Jacob, 'Give me children, or I shall die.' And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, 'Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?'" Rachel's heart-wrenching plea for death breaks our hearts, but she lived in a harsh reality where infant and young people mortality rates were so high, threatening the survival of entire nations. In such a harsh world, a woman's sole duty was to bear children for her husband. A barren woman was considered a woman who did not contribute to the resilience of her family, and her status fell to its lowest point. We saw how terrible the situation of the barren Sarah was, that even her slave dared to mock her. Now we are witnessing this again, and when we get to Hannah's story, we will see it for the 3rd time. Let us discuss Rachel's jealousy of her sister. Rachel's beauty contrasted with Leah's lack of beauty. One was barren while the other was fertile. Jacob's love for Rachel and his hatred for Leah fueled the fire of jealousy between the 2 sisters. But the text gives the impression that Rachel's jealousy developed into real hatred towards her sister. Why? What explains her hatred? The answer that Rachel was jealous because Leah had given birth to many children is true, but it is only a partial answer. Rachel had another reason to hate her sister, and to explain it, we should discuss Leah's weak eyes and the unique writing style of the Bible that is always surprising anew. As regular practice, if a hero's appearance did not contribute to understanding the story, nothing was said about their looks. The Bible does not describe how Abraham, Isaac, Moses, the judges, kings, and prophets appeared. A minimal deviation from this practice occurs only in cases where the hero's appearance was important to the associated story. For example, Saul is described as tall man. His stature distinguished him from the rest of the people and indicated that he was fit to be the first king of Israel. David was red-headed and handsome. His boyish and amiable appearance emphasizes the contrast between him and the Philistine giant Goliath. Esau is said to be hairy, and Jacob is said to be smooth. The difference between the twins played a decisive role on the day when Jacob stood before his blind father and declared that he was his twin brother. The Bible rarely describes the women's appearance, settling for 2 words at most. Rachel and Abigail were said to be beautiful. Esther was chosen to be a wife to Ahasuerus, the Persian emperor. But despite being a beautiful woman, we do not know what set her apart from all the other beauties presented to the king. Since the appearances of Tamar, Hannah, Peninnah, Deborah, and Ruth do not contribute to understanding their stories, the Bible devotes no words to describing them. Against this background of minimal descriptions of women's looks, there are only 2 exceptional cases identifying specific women unmistakably. Zipporah, Moses' wife, is described as a Cushite, meaning she was born in the land of Cush, present-day Sudan, and named after the country in which she was born. The second woman with an identifying mark is Leah, whose eyes are described as weak. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel was beautiful and lovely. Genesis 29:16-17. The contrast between Rachel's beauty and Leah's weak eyes is no coincidence. This significant flaw must be explained. We will never know the exact nature of Leah's eye flaw, but it was pronounced enough to distinguish her from other biblical women's. Because of this defect, Laban could not marry her as a senior wife and receive a bride price. He had to give her in marriage for free as a concubine, an inferior status to senior wives. The fact that Laban could not get a bride price for Leah due to her defect is a key to the whole story. It explains why he did not demand Jacob marry her first, breaking the custom of marrying the eldest daughter first. It also explains why Laban did not initially request a bride price for her. This assumption clarifies why, at Rachel's wedding banquet, Laban watered Jacob a lot of wine and married Leah to him as a senior wife at Rachel's bride price expense, and then forced him to return to square one and pay double price for Rachel. So, if we ask why Jacob hated Leah, the answer is clear. Laban deceitfully married him to a woman that any other man could have taken as a concubine for free. Rachel had her own reason to hate her sister. In a house where the man was married to several senior wives, the status of the woman who gave birth to his eldest son was higher than that of his other wives. Her son inherited his father's assets and his position as head of the family, and this practice is still observed in modern royal houses like England's. As we mentioned in episode 7, in the ancient world about 50% of newborns died before age 5, making the status of the eldest son precarious. If he died, the status of firstborn passed to the son born after him, even if he was born to another woman. And if the second son also died, the debut status passed to the third son, and so on. According to the Bible, Leah bore Jacob 6 sons before Rachel could conceive for the first time. From Rachel's perspective, her sister should have married as a concubine, and if that had happened, then Rachel would have been Jacob's sole senior wife. In such a case, the status of Joseph and Benjamin, who were born last, was higher than that of Leah's 6 sons, even though they were born before them. Perhaps this could have compensated Rachel for her long years of barrenness. It seems Rachel hated Leah because the bride price taken from her and given to her disabled sister came at the expense of her son's status. And if she felt her sister had stolen that status, she had reason for it. Now we will make a sharp U-turn and retell the story from the beginning, but from the theological perspective, since the Bible is foremost a theological treatise where God's presence is immensely important. From a historical viewpoint, the explanations given here reflect the reality that prevailed in Israel and in the ancient world. But theologically, the story is quite different. According to the Bible, Rachel was an ordinary woman, while Leah was the woman God had designated for Jacob. Jacob was the forefather of the 12 tribes of Israel, named after the 12 sons born to him. However, the sons were not of equal status. The status of Levi and Judah, who were born to Leah, was much, much higher than their brothers. At the time of the Exodus, which took place some 500 years after the time of Leah and Jacob, God decreed that the priesthood in Israel would be given to priests from the tribe of Levi, named after Leah's 3rd son. Of the priestly families, the high priesthood was given to Aaron, Moses' old brother, Exodus 28. The tribe of Judah was named after Leah's 4th son. David, the greatest king of Israel, to whom and to whose descendants God gave the kingdom forever, was a member of the tribe of Judah. The prophet Isaiah decreed that the Messiah who would arrive in Israel in the Messianic age would be from the house of David, Isaiah 11, 1-5. According to the New Testament, Jesus was a descendant of David, and he was the Messiah to whom the Bible refers, which means that Leah was also the ancient mother of Jesus. From a theological perspective, the meaning of what we have said is unequivocal and clear. Just as God designated Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to be the forefathers of the dynasty of kings and the priests of Israel, so he designated Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah to be their foremothers. And this claim will also accompany us in future episodes when we will talk about Tamar and Ruth. There is no doubt that from an earthly point of view, due to the flaw in Leah's eyes, she should have married as a concubine. But from a theological aspect, God did not care about her flaw. And since God decreed that Leah would be the foremother of the kings and the high priestly families, she should have married Jacob as a senior wife, even if it came at her sister's expense. When we realize that Leah was a chosen woman, we realize that Jacob fell in love with the wrong woman. We also realize that the hand that determines the fates sent Laban to marry Jacob, the woman who was meant for him. From a theological point of view, Judah and Levi could not be the sons of a concubine because the sons of concubines were not entitled to inherit from their father. The struggle between the two sisters was finally decided about 600 years later in the days of Saul and David. Saul, the first king of Israel, was a member of the tribe of Benjamin, who bore the name of Rachel's youngest son. But the hand that determined the fates corrected this mistake and transferred the monarchy to David, who was born to the tribe of Judah, whose ancient mother was Leah. The next episode will be devoted to Rachel and Leah's married life. We will talk once again about the unique way in which the Bible was written, which is so different from today's writing style. We will show our listeners that within the story that is familiar to everyone hides a second story based on puns and words with different meanings, which only readers of the Bible in the original language can discern. The hidden story tells how the world of the beloved Rachel deteriorated, and how the hated Leah gradually upgraded her status. Indeed, Jacob's last request to his sons was to be buried by Leah's side, not by Rachel's. Before we say goodbye, we will remind our listeners that our podcast is a unique project that combines historical knowledge and proficiency in the original language in which the Bible was written. To produce more episodes, we need your support. Anyone interested in donating to us is welcome to visit our website and donate through Patreon. Anyone interested in purchasing Dr. Leora Ravid's book, Daily Life in Biblical Times, can do so through our website. The book relates to the stories of the Bible from a historical, legal, and social perspective, and contains translations of puns that got lost in the English translation of the Bible. Until the next episode, thank you very much, and please tell your relatives and friends about our podcast.